Hello and thanks for joining us. I'm Russell White. Workplace health and safety is a major issue for every industry, but perhaps has even greater relevance in the heavy vehicle transport sector. The workplace health and safety laws are further complemented by the far-reaching chain of responsibility legislation. In essence, chain of responsibility means that everyone in the supply chain can be held legally liable if a road safety breach was to occur. The law requires that you take all reasonable steps to ensure that you comply with this legislation. To talk to us more about this issue, its implications, and more importantly, what it means to you, I'm joined by Mr. Graham Bladen from Chain of Responsibility Management Systems Australia. Graham, thanks for your time. For the benefit of the viewers, could you maybe give us a broad overview on what chain of responsibility means?
Russell, chain of responsibility applies to all associated in heavy transport, not just the drivers. Schedulers, freight forwarders, consignors, consignees, management, all the operation side are now implicated by chain of responsibility laws and are obliged to follow them.
Graham, what are some of the key issues for the heavy vehicle transport sector when it comes to chain of responsibility?
Well, Russell, the first thing is to note that no one can ignore these. The legislation clearly states that you must take reasonable steps to ensure there are no breaches. And a reasonable steps defence counts on the fact that you have documented and placed this evidence clearly into the company that you're with. No one can ignore them. The reasonable steps defence is a defence that states that you have evidence to show that you have informed, trained and supervised the people appropriately.
So what you're saying then is that having a she'll be right attitude just simply won't cut it, and you must have systems and procedures in place to record what you're doing, but also the ongoing development of each of your staff members.
Yeah, you need to have a chain of responsibility management system in place. That is a system that informs everybody from top management through to the drivers that they are obliged and obligated under the chain of responsibility legislation to ensure safety in the workplace. Also, they're obliged not to put pressure on or influence. In essence, it is if you have control, you have responsibility, therefore you are liable.
And that extends all the way through, from the top down?
It extends from the driver through to the managing director of companies, and in some cases, even the corporate boards and charities. Anybody involved or associated with heavy transport ensure that they comply with chain of responsibility.
An interesting point then, with 95% or more than 95% of all road crashes being the result of human error, what role do you think training plays in that process?
Russell, I've often said holding a valid driver's licence doesn't make you competent, it makes you legal. Chain of responsibility ensures that the training, supervision and information is out there for everybody that is associated, and it must be documented and qualified training. The evidential trail, if there is an incident, the investigators will look for. It needs to be clearly documented and clearly shown that they did what they could do or what they reasonably could have done to prevent that breach.
So literally throwing the keys over to someone untrained is a big problem?
Well, non-compliance. Yeah. At the end of the day, you have people that are moving giant plant and equipment around the place, but it's also the loaders, how to load correctly, schedulers, how to put the timing correctly so they don't infringe fatigue laws, and of course your consignors and consignees and consignors. They cannot receive goods if they know it could not have been there in the appropriate time under the laws, and they cannot influence the transport companies, for instance, to make sure things are delivered outside of those laws.
I guess if we looked at a worst case scenario, potentially what could happen if a driver was seriously injured or worse killed in an incident, what would be the worst case scenario for, I guess from a legal perspective, that could be applied under this chain of responsibility legislation?
Well, Russell, it's up to the courts, of course, ultimately, but at the end of the day, there have been corporations that have had drivers jailed, directors fined. There is such a thing as a corporate multiplier, which allows the court to place a 5 times fine against the individual fine on the corporation. And indeed there's also the commercial gains aspect, where the courts can apply what they consider has been the gains made through non-compliance, and they can fine them that amount. So it can be in the millions.
So it could literally multiply significantly based on that formula.
Yes, and it all comes down to making sure that there is no influence being placed upon the transport sector for them to infringe or be non-compliant.
Graham, the work that we do with organisations through our efforts with driversafety.com.au, we often see a lot of companies wanting to comply. They're aware of what they have to do and they're trying to meet this compliance. What advice would you give to organisations that are already starting to take these first steps in this direction?
Well, Russell, it's always the case that nothing happens until something happens, and then it's usually panic stations. Workplace health and safety legislation is often in place in companies, but chain of responsibility has been neglected. Chain of responsibility needs documented evidence so that if there is an investigation, the investigators can see that trail. That is, everybody in the company has been informed or supervised or trained to a qualifying level for them to do the task that they've been asked to do. It's about ensuring safety, not just hoping safety's there. So a chain of responsibility management system should be in place with each company or each organisation to complement their workplace health and safety systems.
And Graham, I guess all these chain of responsibility laws are in effect right now, aren't they?
Absolutely. In fact, there is a recent addition where we have now the speeding compliance that has been added to chain of responsibility. Mass dimension, speeding, fatigue, all of these areas are specifically monitored by chain of responsibility.
And so I guess the message is to act now?
The message is to act now and all of the time to ensure the safety of all that use the roads and don't incur a breach of the chain of responsibility legislation.
Graham, for today we've spoken a lot and focused a lot, rightly so, on the heavy vehicle transport sector. But does chain of responsibility apply to the light vehicle sector as well? So in other words, couriers, vans, trailers, you name it, if it's a fleet involved, do the same chain of responsibility legislation aspects apply to a light fleet as well as a heavy vehicle fleet?
It's interesting you mentioned that. The original draft of chain of responsibility was looking at including light vehicles at the very instigation of this. Under workplace health and safety, your workplace is the area you work. If you are in a car, the workplace is the car. Likewise with heavy vehicles, the cab of the truck is the workplace for the driver. So it's interesting to note that chain of responsibility can be applied to light vehicles as much as it is applied to heavy vehicles if it's used in the workplace for the job. There's also insurance implications which would suggest that if you breach the chain of responsibility legislation while in a company vehicle of any size, the insurance may or may not pay the claim. And there's costly implications with that, not only ensuring the safety of the drivers and safety of your employees, it's important that there could be significant financial aspects to this.
So regardless of what size the fleet, how big the vehicle, how small the vehicle, the same rules apply to everyone across the board. If it involves road transport, the chain of responsibility applies.
The spirit of the legislation is suggesting that very, very loudly.
Well, Graham, it's a thought-provoking issue. I'm sure there's many fleet operators, no matter what size, right around the country and even possibly around the world that are concerned about this sort of thing. I want to thank you so much for your time today and sharing your insight with us. Greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure.
The aim of the program was to highlight the scope of your responsibilities when it comes to ensuring compliance with both workplace health and safety and chain of responsibility legislation. It's designed to give you a starting point for the ongoing development of your drivers and management. For more information on chain of responsibility, check out the contact details at the end of this video. Driver training and education is clearly a vital link in the chain of responsibility and simply cannot be overlooked. The key is to act now. The consequences of inaction could be costly in more ways than one. Take care. Thanks for viewing and drive safe.